Hello, everybody. You're listening to the Big Chill Podcast. This is episode 423, Off the Pitch with Alex Payne. Hello, Big Chillians, and welcome back to the Big Chill Podcast. I'm Frank, joined with a slightly slimmer, a little more white and ghoulish looking Eddie.
I don't know if
Eddie,
I appreciate
hashtag Norovirus 2022. How you feeling?
Yeah, I've had better weeks. I think it's fair to say, but I'm on the road to recovery at this point.
Never. The stomach bug is the worst, I think, of the sicknesses in terms of things that you eventually get over, but in the moment feel as if you just want to end it.
I'll actually say, for me, from that particular virus, it was the joint ache, because that's just the thing that, yeah, I mean, that was just the thing when you're trying to rest, and just every position you put your body in, there is ache. In my knees, in my elbows, in my back, in my shoulder, like everywhere was just aching. So there was kind of no way, even when there was a respite in all the other symptoms, there was no way to sort of start to feel a little bit better overall.
So the aching beat out the having to sleep on the bathroom floor because you couldn't last more than 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, that I kind of got used to pretty quickly. It was literally at one moment I just wanted to sleep, and I was just completely unable to sleep. That was,
I mean, at least you were at home and you had good familial support to get you through it.
Yes, exactly. I think there is an interesting moment. I think you spend a lot of your life, right, wanting to be back home when you're sick, thinking about how the comfort and the support that you would get. And then I think there's a moment when you hit a certain age when that is no longer totally there in the same way, and where you would be better off somewhere else. I think I've probably, whatever that age is, I've probably hit it.
I just love thinking about it. There's like this, if it was like 4 years earlier, they're there caring for you, whatever you
100%.
need, stay
Yeah.
extra. Oh, we'll call your work, we'll tell you. And then it's like, flip the switch. Eddie, will you just get up already?
Yeah, suck it
You're
up. Get over it.
inconveniencing the family.
And not helped also by the fact, right, that, my nephew was also around. So you have the tiring impact of a young child who's also sucking up a lot of the attention. So you really are just an inconvenience, because I'm not bringing any of the sweetness and joy of a young child, just the messiness.
Oh, God.
But having got this off to a wonderful start, we'll obviously have new listeners tuning in for our interview with Alex Payne, co-founder of The Room, current co-host of the Good, the Bad, and the Rugby podcast, former presenter on Sky Sports. We have a really interesting conversation with him coming up about 30 minutes in. Obviously, we don't encourage listeners to skip it, but if that's the only reason you're here, you can skip ahead for it.
Yeah.
But
don't get turned off by this initial talk.
No, it's not.
Everyone gets sick, right? Let's not beat around the bush here.
Exactly. But yeah, great conversation with him about how to break into the media, some of his best moments from covering sports around the world. So a little bit of rugby chat, a little bit of podcast talk, and a discussion about the room and organic branding opportunities with influencers, even though he doesn't like to use that word. But, it's a really interesting conversation.
Not organic food, organic in the way it develops.
No, exactly. But could be organic food if that's your thing.
Yes, but it would develop organically with people who like organic food.
Exactly.
That's a super green transaction.
There you go. That's the niche you can carve out for yourself.
Eddie, today is an anniversary, actually. This might get us into our first topic. Do you want to guess what it is the 1 year anniversary of, which is crazy to think it's been 1 year? I will hint at you, it was a rise and a fall.
A rise and a fall a year ago. No, I know we just had the 2-year anniversary of the Last Dance documentary coming out. That was the only anniversary that kind of hit my radar. I don't know what the 1 year anniversary is.
Anniversary of the Super League. The
Oh yeah, I
infamous
did.
Super League.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah, I mean, look, they've done a really good job of getting that out of people's minds. It
Just to
comes
bring
up.
it back in a few years.
Yeah, exactly. It comes up in conversation very occasionally, but fundamentally, all of those clubs have done a really good job of moving the conversation on and not having it be brought up on a consistent basis with how can we trust any of you? None of you really have the fans' interest at heart.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure some of those clubs have bigger things to worry about now at this point than almost being a part of the Super League.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's one or two of them who might not be invited into the Super League if it were now to occur. So I think the landscape may have shifted by the time the idea becomes a reality. But I guess speaking of the European Super League, we can do a quick catch up, although it's now a week removed pretty much, but of the latest Champions League rounds, which I guess there's not too much to discuss. Liverpool went through comfortably with a second leg 3-3 draw, but having won the first leg, they kind of always knew they were going through, barring a total collapse. City were on the back foot for large parts of the second leg against Atletico Madrid, but managed to go through thanks to the one goal they scored at home. The big talking point there was just how the match unraveled towards the end and how Atletico's dirtier tactics kind of came to the forefront over the course of the match. And then you had the thriller, the real talking point of the round between Chelsea and Real Madrid, where Chelsea looked as if they were about to pull off an unlikely comeback, but eventually Real Madrid were able to sneak through. And then the shock of the round, which was Bayern Munich conceding a late goal and getting knocked out by Villarreal.
Yeah, a lot of places to go here. I'll just give little tidbits of myself. So the Chelsea game was one of the first matches in a long time that I was unaware it was happening, and then I went to Instagram, and on my feed popped up, it was a picture of Jon Snow and like in like a Chelsea kit, and saying like, like they have life. And I looked and I said, no way. And then went and looked, and then at the time it was when they had just scored the third goal, which then got disallowed. So then as soon as that happened, or not disallowed, but VAR overturned it, right, with the offside. So
Yeah,
after that, I instantly put it on and watched the rest of that match. Um, so that was a great match. And then the City match, I mean, I have I draw the line at pulling Jack Grealish's hair. I mean, that's a no go. That's as bad as it gets. There are a few lines that you can cross, but that is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit torn. In some ways, I think Atletico's approach to the game is admirable. It's a kind of counterculture movement almost, in that they don't play the way the game is played by all the other big teams. At the same time, I find people talk about them as if they're kind of these plucky underdogs and these lovable losers. They have João Felix up front. They spent 113 million pounds on him. But their team has been assembled at a great cost. And okay, they might not be spending quite the same sums of money that some of the very biggest teams are, but they are outspending almost everyone else in Europe. So the fact that they're in a Champions League quarterfinals shouldn't be surprising. And look, Diego Simeone took a team that were not particularly relevant in Spain and now turned them into a consistent top three team. They've won La Liga twice. They've made Champions League finals. So, he has done something fantastic there, but they cross a line consistently. And there are moments when the commitment to the cause becomes just unpleasant to watch. And I think that match against Manchester City was one of them. And in some respects, they in particular do it because towards the end of matches where they know they have nothing to lose. I mean, Manchester City were in a position there where bookings and red cards could cost them the ability to play in the next stages of the competition. For Atletico Madrid, it meant nothing fundamentally at that point. So I think I
I
admire.
thought City handled themselves well.
Yeah, they did. They didn't. They
I
didn't.
mean,
It would have been easy for them to react, and
yeah,
for them to actually lose their. I mean, I think they got rattled by it in just the sense that they were clinging on towards the end of that match, and you could tell that their mentality definitely shifted in that second half. But yeah, they didn't do anything stupid, which would have been very easy to do. And I think in particular the likes of Phil Foden, with the way he handled being kind of kicked around the pitch, I think he dealt with it pretty well. But it's a shame because I do want to admire Atletico Madrid, the commitment that they show for the cause, the willingness of all of them just to put in every ounce of effort in every match, and the way Diego Simeone convinces really talented players to do all the dirty, ugly work that other teams can't get players to do. It's fantastic. But that it also comes with an actual dirty side, I think that's the shame. And what's more is I don't like the hypocrisy. I don't like the fact that Atletico Madrid spend every minute of every match trying to find every loophole in the laws and trying to manipulate referees and trying to get opposition players worked up. But then the second an opponent does anything resembling any of those tactics, they become offended and treat it as if the game is being brought into disrepute. So I think that hypocrisy and inconsistency is probably what bothers me the most. If they almost looked on at it and thought, okay, we're going to give you some and we're going to get some in return, it would sit a little bit better with me. But overall, I mean, I'm very happy they went out. Both and they're not one of the best four teams in Europe, and also they just don't deserve. When you play that way, you don't deserve to be through. And I would feel entirely differently if they were a smaller team. If this had been like, even if Benfica had been doing that against Liverpool, I would have understood it more because you would have thought the playing field here is so against you that you have to resort to these sorts of tactics to get through. But the fact that you are talking about Atletico Madrid with the likes of Griezmann and João Felix and a host of really talented attacking players, and that's seemingly the only way they feel like they can compete, that's the bit I don't like.
Yeah, I mean, from someone who's slightly on the outside, I'd watch a decent amount, but I'm not in every week and out. But to me, I've never considered them a team who's a plucky underdog team. I've always thought of them as a top 4 or 5 team in La Liga, which is one of the better leagues in the world. So I don't see that underdog story for them at all. So and you're right. I understand why they were doing what they were doing, but at the same time, if you're gonna cross the line doing it, then you're gonna be the bad guy, and I think you have to live with that.
I think that's the other thing. They don't accept the kind of heel status,
No,
and that's
no, they
part of the
don't.
thing. They sort of feel as if they're being hard done with the media coverage, hard done by, and they do get a lot of praise. Even Guardiola speaking about after the match, talking about how he does feel like they get misrepresented sometimes in the press because they get talked about as being a negative defensive team, and in reality, they're maybe just a little bit more structured in the first 2/3 of the pitch, and then, but still in that final third, are very creative and dangerous, which I think is high praise coming from Guardiola because he and his managerial mindset has always been of the opinion that you coach players for the first 2/3, that's where a manager matters, is for those first 2/3 of the pitch, and in the final third is where you're letting talented players be expressive and do what they do best. So that's something very meaningful coming from him. But yeah, I mean, I can, and again, there is context, right? In terms of the overall Spanish landscape, they are very much, the younger brother, sort of awkward sibling to Real Madrid. But for the last 10 years now, they've been consistently in the top 3 and competing in the latter stages of European competition. So there's a moment at which your mindset has to catch up with what you're actually doing. And yeah, they do seem, the fact that they don't just accept the heel status, I think that would make me kind of like them. It's a little bit like the criticism of Deschamps almost, like not being able to like completely embrace the
Yeah,
position you could have within a game is part of what makes it uncomfortable. And if you just said, you know what, I'm going to be the bad guy, no one's going to like me, and I'm going to love that they don't like me, then that would be, you'd have to admire that. But the fact that you're doing everything to make people dislike you and then be like, why does nobody like me? That's the thing that's annoying.
and you wonder if they're actually that self unaware, or if that's part of it too. But I guess moving on to the Chelsea Real Madrid match, my question to you is, I mean, this has been a great few weeks for Karim Benzema. Is he playing up to his potential now, or is he just on a hot streak right now.
It's a tough one. I think he's been kind of criminally, and I use that word intentionally when it comes to Benzema. But I think
I was going to say no criminal. I was literally going to say no criminal jokes aside here.
Yeah, I think he's been criminally underrated in the UK because of a player who's plied his trade in France and then in Spain, and it's kind of been easy to ignore in some ways, as not maybe having the full star power of some of his teammates at Real Madrid. So always kind of being overshadowed by the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo or Gareth Bale or Hazard or whoever it is. So I think in the UK that people probably are only just beginning to appreciate what a good player he is, and I think maybe even some people up until now kind of thought of him almost like Giroud, sort of kind of hardworking, can take his chances, but nothing to write home about. And he's much, much better than that.
Great French stereotype right there.
Yeah. At the same time, I think he's probably becoming slightly overrated. Now people are kind of throwing him into, is he maybe the best player in the world at the moment? Is he the greatest goal scorer at least around at the moment? He's playing very well, but I mean, I'm not putting him on a par with the likes of even, Erling Haaland, who's 21 years old. So I think depends where you are. And, I think he's showing some of his true quality, but still remains slightly below the very best.
Where would you rank him in a goal scorer category? Top 10?
Yeah, he's definitely top 10 in the world.
Top 5?
Were we considering him in like goal scoring traditional forwards kind of position? Like not throwing midfielders in as goal scorers.
Yeah,
like,
no.
Yeah, probably top 5. Yeah. I mean, he might even be third. It's hard. I mean, Lukaku can't really be in the conversation because he's barely playing. So there's one person who would have figured very highly last season who's no longer really a factor. Yeah, I mean, you'd have Haaland and Lewandowski definitely above him. Then it becomes, Mbappe, kind of difficult to classify him sometimes because he is being played in sort of wide positions, but I guess I'd still put Mbappe ahead of him. Yeah, he's probably somewhere in the top 5.
And then I guess the other follow up to finish up European football would be the FA Cup semifinals, where 4 days after playing each other for a crucial Premier League match, Liverpool and City played each other in the semis, and Liverpool.
A week.
A week, sorry.
Yeah. Well, 6 days.
Liverpool kind of took it to them.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, Manchester City rested more players than Liverpool did. It felt like Manchester City were willing to lose this one. Still, they're putting on a really strong team. But in the first half, they were terrible. Liverpool were very good. And then City kind of woke up in the second half. But yeah, I mean, it did feel a bit as if City were just willing to roll the dice and see, but weren't going to try too hard in terms of expending players that they'd otherwise want to save for. I mean, because, not only do they obviously have the Premier League run in to worry about, they have the tougher Champions League semi-final. Not to say that Villarreal are in any way a gimme for Liverpool, but it's definitely an easier prospect than playing Real Madrid. So Liverpool have had Benfica and now Villarreal in the latter stages of the Champions League. Again, with the utmost respect to those teams, and they're not easy games, but when you're talking about Champions League quarterfinals and Champions League semifinals, they're as easy as you could expect. So, man management becomes a little bit trickier maybe for City than it is for Liverpool.
Yeah, and then, watching both of those matches, I think the question I had for you, watching how they unfolded and the difference in the possession from that first match to the second match, and just the passing and the overall flow, is Kevin De Bruyne that impactful? Is he that good that it makes such a difference? Because, I mean, not that they looked like two completely different teams, but the first match, I would have said City easily had the upper hand here. In that second match, they didn't look nearly as well in control or just as fluid as they did in that first match. Is he that significant?
I think he is
definitely drop off that much.
He's definitely the player that kind of makes them tick. So I do think once he's not involved, they can, of course, they're packed full of really talented players. So I think they can still play incredible football. But he is the player that pulls the strings for them and can prove the difference maker in a lot of situations, and just kind of brings their overall play together, and kind of serves as that connecting tissue at times between their midfield and their attacking play. But in addition, I think Liverpool probably took a lot of confidence out of their performance in the second half of their Premier League match. I think, you know, City had them down and out in the first half, and then the fact that they let them back in the second half, I think Liverpool have probably walked away from that feeling. As you know, we spoke about that in the aftermath of that Premier League match. I think Liverpool kind of may feel as if they picked themselves off the canvas a bit, and then were able to go toe to toe with City. And maybe City might regret come the end of the season, and particularly if they're going to play each other in a Champions League final, they might regret that they didn't manage to just, put their foot on the throat and keep it there, because that was an opportunity to serve a knockout blow in terms of saying, right now we're much better than you. You can't live with us. And in that first half of that Premier League match, that's what they showed. And then in the second half, Liverpool were able to fight back. I think, yeah, I mean, City, they were definitely missing De Bruyne in that match. And then they just miss a center forward presence. And obviously there's all the talk, endless speculation that they're signing Haaland this summer with the release clause that he has in contract, because he's available for £65 million, I think it is. So, constant speculation that he'll be going to City and Mbappe is going on a free to Real Madrid, and those are the kind of two major transfers that will happen this summer. But I mean, they need him. Not that we say they need them. They could be on course.
They need him.
They could be on course to win the Premier League and the Champions League, but there's still moments where it looks like they need a true goal scorer because they don't have one.
Yeah. So, with what you just said, that they are on course to potentially win, are they still your favorite for Champions League and for Premier League?
So for the Premier League, I think so. I think they're both going to win all of their remaining matches. I mean,
They all win out.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I think they're both perfect from now on. Liverpool, as of tonight recording, beat United 4-0 based on United showing. That wasn't anything impressive. They looked absolutely awful, but it's 6 matches to go for them. It's one step closer to doing, holding up their end of the bargain. If you're from a Liverpool supporter's perspective, I just think they both. It it's kind of mind blowing at times, because historically, you would have always said one of them is going to slip up. Like winning 7 matches in a row in the Premier League is no mean feat, regardless of who your run-in is. But it just feels like with both of these teams, they just are able to churn out results, and I think they'll both win all of their matches. So I think City will win the league. I kind of shifted my opinion a little bit. I think Liverpool will win the Champions League. I feel like they've got a little bit more swagger at the moment. Like, I think they're getting close to their A game, and City are just a little bit below par. Like, not by much, and it's still far too good for most teams, but they're just not quite firing on all cylinders. And look, we're talking about, 6 weeks away. A lot can change in 6 weeks, either in terms of injuries or a couple of players really find their top form. That could change everything. But it does feel like Liverpool, certainly from an attacking sense, are playing just about as well as they can right now. And maybe City aren't quite there right at the moment. So I think I'd shift
Yeah.
in favor of Liverpool.
So for our listeners, Liverpool's remaining schedule is Everton, Newcastle, Spurs, Villa, Southampton, and Wolves. And City's is Brighton, Watford, Leeds, Newcastle, West Ham, and Villa. So
yeah, so I mean the standout ones there would be Spurs from a Liverpool perspective and West Ham from the City perspective. But there are a few plucky sides in there as well. Leeds, Newcastle, teams who are playing sort of reasonably well at the moment. So there's no easy matches, and they're certainly going to, with the level of pressure that will be on both those teams, where a draw could be, it's all over. And and they're going to be tested because at some point both of those teams will be behind. That's going to be the interesting thing. Like, you're not going to play out the remainder of these seasons without falling behind to a goal or conceding an equalizer in the second half and kind of having to do that calculation in your head of, we have 20 minutes to get a winner or else season is kind of over. So they're both, I'm sure they'll both be tested. I just think they'll both end up doing what they need to do. And so City will win by a point.
So switching gears a little bit before we get to the interview, I had a little golf news. So this combines golf, NFL, and college football. A little trifecta here. So the first one is, I don't know if you saw after the Masters, there was a pretty big article about how John Daly had spent all week of the Masters at Hooters, just watching the Masters
Yeah, it's
at
his
Hooters,
thing. He does it every year.
Drink a beer. That's his thing. I know.
Yeah,
it's his thing.
It's weird.
But his son has now cashed in on that. I don't know if you've seen this. So John Daly II, who has only played one collegiate tournament at the University of Arkansas, has now signed an NIL deal with Hooters. So he is the first NIL that Hooters has signed with a college athlete, going right to John Daly, not Junior, the second, to get that. How do you feel about an 18-year-old college freshman having his first sponsorship deal be Hooters? And no offense to Hooters.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it surprises me that that's where Hooters' brand is. If you see what I mean. Like, I know that John Daly still has some cultural resonance, but we're still talking about someone who probably is kind of unknown to anyone under the age of 30. Like, and so it sort of surprises me that either he or his son, in whatever, group you're getting them in, would be relevant enough to think it's worth signing a promotional deal with. I think that's the thing that surprises me most. And not a knock on, I don't know if I'm trying to, I guess he's embracing the legacy of his dad in that one. Part of me would think if I were him, I might be trying to separate myself slightly from some of the less admirable aspects of my father's golfing career, like the things that maybe cost him fulfilling the potential that he had. There might be part of me that thought in the early parts, even if you're tremendously proud of your dad, who's obviously had still, a much more successful professional sporting career than most could dream of, there might be part of me that thinks I'd like to just get out of that shadow a little bit and not really come across as the next John Daly.
Yeah. And even if it were like Applebee's, and the story was John Daly goes to Applebee's for 5 straight days and drinks and eats wings for 7 hours, it's still not a good look.
No.
It's more just the culture that John Daly surrounded him, where other golfers, especially golfers on that Champions Tour, are still, up at the gym every morning or taking care of their body and eating healthy and extending their careers. And then you have the opposite, where you have someone who probably could have had a longer career had he taken care of himself.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're talking about starting as you mean to go on, if this is the message that John Daly the second wants to send to the world in terms of what his work ethic will be like and what his priorities are, it's probably, look, Tiger Woods probably isn't doing it. Let's put it that way. Tiger Woods' son, Charlie Woods, right? In like 7 years or whatever, is not signing a deal with Hooters. So, and look, I've seen John Daly II play golf. He's pretty talented. He hit like his dad. He hits the ball a really long way, incredibly fast swing speed. But yeah, if your priorities might not be quite right in terms of maximizing your golfing potential. Maybe they're right in terms of maximizing the fun you have in your life. That's a whole different thing. I mean, we could get into a really interesting discussion who's enjoyed their life more, Tiger Woods or John Daly. One of them has probably drained every.
Well, I don't know. That's a tough debate. I'm sure we should get them both on and have them argue for who thinks they've done a better job.
Yeah.
But I mean, the other issue to me is, again, this isn't a knock on Hooters. This is a knock on the sense that I'm pretty sure it's Hooters Bar and Grill. So you're an 18-year-old freshman and you're being associated with a restaurant whose primary tag is bar. It's not grill and bar, it's bar.
They pitch themselves as a family restaurant, right? I mean, that's their thing. It's
I
like a
guess, but
family
it's still a
restaurant.
bar.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the.
Speaking of getting Tiger Woods and John Daly on, do you think we could have them on and pitch to them this idea that they each share, like if Tiger Woods pitched stories from his wildest time, and then it was just a question of who did this, Tiger Woods or John Daly, how difficult of a game do you think that would be?
That'd be a good one. That'd be
But
pretty good.
have I ever told you my? I probably have my Hooters story. I've only been to Hooters once in my life.
Did you pull the Michael Scott?
No,
I'll take a chicken breast, hold the chicken.
I went to Hooters when I was in high school. We went to play football in Vienna, and Vienna at the time was the only European city with a Hooters in it. And we were.
It's a weird first choice, but okay.
And we found this out.
I want to know that marketing guy who was like, guys, we're going to expand overseas. Vienna is our target.
And we somehow found this out in the way that 16 17-year-old boys would. And then we had a day where we weren't playing, so we decided we would walk and check out the Hooters, and walked into this Vienna Hooters at 3:00 in the afternoon. It was totally empty, and we walked in. There was one waitress working, who was probably 55 years old, so it in no way delivered on any of the expectations that any of us had had.
How were the wings?
Excellent.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, very good. The food was very good, but it wasn't quite what we'd expected.
Yeah, when we were younger and my parents used to host Super Bowl parties all the time, we would actually get like the wings for the party from Hooters. I mean, their wings are great. We get them from them in this other place that was called Cluck You. Another good play on words there. But
hey, if Hooters wants to become the official bar and grill sponsor, family restaurant sponsor of the Big Chill podcast, we can interview John Daly and his son, talk about wings. That's fine by us, but maybe it can change my impression of Hooters. But yeah, so far, I think that might be the only time I experience a Hooters in my life. It's difficult for me to imagine. There's only one scenario, podcast reappearance for someone who's not been mentioned on the podcast for a while. I think Vasilis could be the only thing that could ever take me back to a Hooters. And a trip to the U.S. with Vasilis in tow could probably see Hooters end up on the list of things we have to go to. But I think otherwise, the Hooters ship may have sailed for me.
Well, there's always Vasilis.
Yeah. Gets said by people a lot of time.
That's a good quote for a t-shirt. And then the last golf thing, obviously, was they announced the match, which is kind of this now, I guess, annual, at one point semi-annual celebrity tournament that they have. And this time it's going to be June 1st, and it's Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers versus Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. I like this better than having the pros and the non-pros play, because this is more of a level playing field. I like that aspect. The only aspect I don't really like about this is I don't know why they team up Brady and Rodgers, who are both in the NFC, and Allen and Mahomes, who are both in the AFC, because to me, it'd be a better rivalry to see Mahomes versus Allen, because they're likely to be the bigger rivals because they'll play each other more. Like, how much of a rival is Mahomes to Rodgers when they meet, once?
See, that's not what bothers me about it. I think I kind of agree with you, but I think I would have liked more. I guess the issue is you can kind of spin it whatever way you want. I would have liked the idea of one of the old guard taking one of the young guard under his wing, and having it sort of
okay,
like
which would have been similar, right?
Like Brady almost picking his guy and being like,
yeah,
and Josh Allen's the next guy, and he's going to play golf with me. That would have been sort of fun. But I do, I guess this way they get to spin it as the old guys against the young guns sort of thing. But
because I have to feel if there's any rivalry that's established, it's got to be Brady versus Rodgers. like they have to be the most like against each other out of anyone here. They've played the majority against each other.
Are they though?
I mean, how many times has Mahomes and Allen played? 3?
Actually, isn't that one of those shocking things though? Isn't that one of those things where you hear about it? Like Rodgers and Brady have played each other very few times over the course of their career.
Because they've been AFC and NFC for most of their career.
Like I think that was one of those things when the Bucks played the Packers, where it was like only the fourth time or something.
Right? Yeah.
So, I mean, in the reality, the Brady rival is Peyton Manning. I mean, that's.
Yeah, but I feel like Rodgers must dislike Brady because Brady gets a lot of attention that Rodgers probably thinks he should get.
I think this is the issue. I think, like, from an outsider's perspective, you feel as if Rodgers should dislike everyone and everyone should dislike Rodgers. But
maybe that was it. Maybe no one wanted to play with Rodgers and Brady drew the short straw.
but then probably he's kind of popular if you're not on his team. Like, he clearly doesn't deal well with actual teammates. And maybe Brady will hate him by the end of 18 holes. But it seems as if, and if nothing else, he must get a tremendous amount of respect just for his talent level, right? But yeah, I agree with you that it's more interesting without the professionals involved. Just because we see the professionals play golf all the time. And in a sense, this puts more pressure on the amateur golfer because you don't have the professional there to kind of bail you out. Like, this could get really, really ugly. Like you knew when you had 2 professionals there that no matter what, it's like you might chunk the couple shots, but you'll progress down the hole pretty smoothly just because you got the other guy doing the right things. This could literally be, it won't be because they're obviously will practice heavily ahead of this time. And I mean, Patrick Mahomes, I've seen him play golf. He's a pretty decent golfer. We've obviously seen Brady and Rodgers play before. I'm going to assume Josh Allen's pretty good if he's agreed to do this. But
I feel like Josh Allen can crush a golf ball.
Yeah.
Just by just looking at him, I feel like he's got a lot of swing velocity.
But it's still, it's still at play here that you could just have like 7 consecutive tee shots just lost in the woods. And that was never going to happen as long as a professional was there. But yeah.
And the other aspect I like is it's only 12 holes. And I think the first 1 or 2 suffered from the fact I think they went a full 18 and it's too much. You could even cut it to 9 and I'd be happy. But 12 I think is a decent medium where you're getting enough. It's probably going to be 3 hours worth of play.
Yeah, they did that shift with the Koepka DeChambeau.
Because the one before rivalry. It had gotten dark and they couldn't even finish.
Yeah. No, I think 18's too much. Because, I mean, for most people, right, it's more of a novelty. It's a tune in for a couple of holes and then watch the highlights. I can't imagine there are many people out there who are literally going to sit down for the full 12 holes and watch it live. I mean, as much as I love sports, I kind of have to question how much free time you have if this is priority viewing for you when it comes around. But I mean,
I already canceled 2 parties.
Was one of them with Tom Brady and the other one with Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah. I had to uninvite Patrick Mahomes, unfortunately.
So, on that note, the smooth transition from golf to our interview with Alex Payne, but I guess it's as good a time as ever to switch over to that interview, which we now recorded a few days ago, but is as relevant as ever. And
yeah, let's do it.
Well, everyone, welcome back to the Big Chill Podcast. We're now delighted to be joined by our guest, Alex Payne, who is the co-host of the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the Rugby, sorry.
We're all ugly. We have rebranded as a rugby. It's a very weak play on words, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, the Rugby Podcast, and CEO and co-founder of The Room, a company that tries to connect brands with influencers who are genuinely passionate about the brands that they're then endorsing. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Lovely to chat to you both. Yeah, I like your global setup. But very, very nice to be here.
Yeah, we're mixing time zones here, which is always interesting and actually kind of unusual for Frank because typically we are recording quite late at night European time. sort of midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. So this is a mix. For Frank to actually be doing a morning session is unusual.
Good on you, Frank. Well done.
Yeah,
Thanks for getting up for us.
Oh no, I just got off a work Zoom, so I'm like amped up and ready to go.
Good. All right. Let's far into it.
So Alex, I mean, there's a number of topics we want to talk to. Everything about the podcast, rugby, obviously the room, and just your background in media. I think all of that is very interesting. I guess trying in terms of picking where to start from, I guess the room might be an interesting starting point. So if you could just explain to our listeners a bit more about the background of the company and sort of how you came about creating it and what the sort of purpose of the company itself is.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to be brief. So before I do that, actually, just to give you your listeners who've got absolutely no idea who I am, my background is actually sports broadcasting, and I did 20 years working for a company in the UK called Sky. Some of the best days of my life, where we could talk anecdote after anecdote. I think at the point when sport was biggest in the public psyche, and when Sky as a company had sort of all the rights that they wanted to at that point, they were properly good fun days. And the reason I mention that element of it in context of what we're now doing with the room is that it's because of the fact that I am absolutely not interested in being a celebrity or an influencer. My wife will tell you that I am very middle age and have been for some time. But the reason for sort of mentioning the sports element before talking about the room is that because I'd built up a fairly, admittedly tepid media profile, I was beginning to experience an unusual phenomenon, which is brands throwing things at me and asking me to do something with it. Or very rarely I would get a brand saying, can we pay you to talk about X, Y, Z on your Twitter or your Instagram? And I'm weak at best on social media. And I found myself a lot of the time not really wanting to get paid. I don't want to stick stuff up on my Instagram channel. It's a pretty sort of pretty big vacuum at the best of times, but it's just not really my thing. And the things that I was being thrown and gifted, I didn't really want, and I didn't really want to talk about. And the whole concept for this business, The Room, came about because one of the opportunities that came my way was a lovely box with 500 quid's worth of Star Wars merchandise in it, okay? Classic promo box. Brands send out hundreds of thousands of them a year, and in this box was books and games and DVDs and TV controllers, beautifully packaged, and a lovely note which said, Alex, we hope you love all of this. If you do, we'd love you to tweet about the fact that we're showing Star Wars back-to-back on our movie channel all weekend. Classic promo box, as I say. All they really want is social media exposure to drive eyeballs to their viewings at the weekend. And apparently they had used an agency who'd spent the best part of a week crunching databases and trying to sweat little black books and trying to find people to give these boxes to. And yours truly was the lucky recipient of one of the 100 that they sent out. And I have absolutely no interest in Star Wars whatsoever. I haven't seen it since I was 8. I've got no interest in spending the weekend watching Star Wars. And so I didn't really know what to do with it. I didn't really want it. And it's just sort of sat on my desk for a little bit. And then for some extraordinary reason, I can't really tell you why, I sent a tweet for them saying, hey, everybody, watch Star Wars this weekend. But because I've got no real interest in it, that tweet got a whopping 12 likes. Probably 4 or 5 of them were bots. And I sort of found myself thinking, what an absolute waste of my time, what an absolute waste of my audience's time, who follow me because I talk about sport and the games that they can watch at the weekend, and what a total and utter waste of the most successful movie franchise in history, and the time and the effort and the campaign that they're running. And so I sort of was mulling this over and thinking, why on earth can Star Wars not find 100 really influential people at the click of a button who would go, I love your films, send me that box and I will go bananas because I love the films. And that essentially is what the room has been built to do. So instead of brands running around and either throwing money at people and probably paying, a lot of cash to people who never quite know whether they love your brand or whether they love the money, or as we explained with the Star Wars episode, just throwing stuff into the ether and hoping that you get something back for it. Star Wars comes to the room. They create an opportunity, as we call it. Hello, we're Star Wars. We've got 100 boxes of cool, limited edition Star Wars merchandise. And we want to give it to people who love Star Wars and would be happy to talk about the fact that we've shown these films at the weekend. And so it's a kind of contra deal. It's a value exchange. That goes onto a browse wall. On the other side of the browse wall and the marketplace, in come your pre-vetted people of influence who are far more interesting than I ever hoped to be. But they are then able, once they're accepted, and I think we're fairly selective about who we let on, but once they're in, they're able to choose the campaigns and the brands that they truly love and are truly interested in and genuinely want to talk about because they're interested in it. And so they will send Star Wars a note and say, I love the films, ping it to me, and I'll go bananas on Twitter. Or send it to me, my son is obsessed right now, and I'll do a lovely YouTube video of him going bananas with it. Or I'm a radio DJ. Give me 5 of those, and I'll give them out as competition prizes. And in doing so, I'll talk about your viewings at the weekend. So it's a very long-winded answer, and apologies, I probably wound down all the time that we had. But essentially, having found a genuine problem from being, generously given things that I didn't really want, and also not able to get to the things that potentially you do. So there are loads of stories I'd love to tell because I'm in a very fortunate position, but it's impossible to get to those brands or have sensible conversations. But ours is a site, it's all about value exchange. Brands offer opportunities, and the people who are genuinely interested and keen to be a part of it are able to say to that brand, I love it, I need it, I want it, and I will talk about it because it's genuinely something that fits with who I am and the stories I like to tell. And so it's beneficial for both sides. That's the aim.
And just to be clear then, there's no exchange of money. It's just, here's some product, you love it, talk about it a little bit more. That's the purpose.
Exactly. And it can be everything. It's products, campaigns, it's experiences. We actually want to build it out into charities and causes as well. So the idea will be that the members of our community will understand that if they are able to go out for dinner in the city of their choice, or get some new golf clubs because they're playing in a pro-am, or receive the home gym kit because it's currently lockdown, that actually if you have an engaged audience, of course you should get paid to talk about the brands that are right for you to be talking about. And I think consumers are getting increasingly savvy as to when a brand association and a hashtag ad is a genuine fit and when it's just people taking cash for posts. And I think the latter is seeing a dramatic drop-off in engagement. But if you are influential and you have an audience, of course you should get paid to talk to that audience. But in order to retain their engagement and their interest, you have to talk about the things you love. And that's why they follow you in the first place, because you create good content, you tell good stories. They don't follow you because you advertise. You have to talk about the things you love, and that's your contra. And actually, if you've got an engaged audience, it's probably important that you do the right thing and you support the charities and the causes that you genuinely believe in. So we talk to our members about the need to blend commercial, contra, and cause-related content, quadruple C, because that is what gives you presence and engagement, but it also enables you to use it to your obvious benefit.
Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense to me. I mean, I've spent the last 10 years or so working with tech startups, and we've pumped a ton of money into trying to get influencers, even highly niched influencers sometimes, to promote a product or a software or a brand. And 9 times out of 10, it's failed miserably, both because I think they're not passionate about it. They have zero interest. You've sent them a kind of outline of what the product is, and they've done this unenthusiastic ad read on a podcast or on a video or a tweet. And I think, like you said, I think people cotton on to it pretty quickly that this is just, they've had money. I'd be interested to know, does this mean, can you kind of bypass the requirement then for them to declare that this is a paid?
That's a very good question. I was actually just going to quickly pick up on your point. It's not just influence, I think, where everyone's searching for advocacy and authenticity at the moment. It's politics, it's news. Everywhere you look, people want to know that what they're looking at is authentic and is genuine. And I think if you're just taking cash, we talk a lot about, in the room, brands don't purchase influence. They don't buy their way onto people's grids, and influencers don't sell themselves to the wrong brands. It has to be collaborative, and we hope that that's a much more beneficial way to work. In answer to your question, we are constantly educating our members around, we have obviously ASA here in the UK and what their guidelines are. It is becoming ever more sort of prominent, and it absolutely is right that the right hashtags and handles are used to protect consumers and for sort of genuine declaration. The metric that we offer, which is nobody getting paid and also nobody controlling any content, is not, certainly hasn't been in the past, a requirement for hashtag ad. It is hashtag gifted over here. We've actually often thought that there's room for sort of hashtag contra and to flesh that out, which is that it's a declaration from an influencer that I am choosing to talk about this thing as a value exchange. And I've chosen to work with the brand rather than the brand just throwing something at me and therefore I'm hashtag gifting it. So it's an ever-moving landscape. It's ever tightening. We're very big on educating our members. We're also, it's a little bit like buying a Ferrari and the showroom manager as you drive it out saying, look, it's up to you whether you go for 60 or not. I mean, we can't control all of the content that our influencers create, but we're very big on making sure they know the latest guidelines and hopefully, seeing the benefit of a hashtag contra where they have chosen to do it, which is more palatable to a consumer than a hashtag ad, which is where I'm being paid to talk about it.
It makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I also think, we've always thought about it when I've been working with startups. You're kind of trying to buy credibility. And that's fundamentally what you're trying to do. So you're trying to piggyback off someone else who's able to say, hey, I do this a lot, and this is part of the the core setup that I have, or a product that I love, or a service that I love that helps me achieve these things. And as soon as people can sniff out the fact that it's just paid, it's immediately blown out of the water. So I do understand from both a brand and an influencer's perspective that you're able to endorse products that you actually like versus just saying, well, I got a little bit of money, so I got to say that I love Gillette razors, even though I never shave, like things, things like that.
But we do. I mean, it's been a very interesting journey for us because we're probably 4 years old now, and I think the market has swung massively to where we have been sitting all this time. But it's taken quite a lot of education on our behalf, and we talk a lot to our brands now. Can you afford to ignore the influential people who truly love you? Is that something that as a brand in this day and age you can afford to do? But if you engage with them and you reward them and you build brand fans rather than just paying people to talk about you, you build genuine brand fans and you work with them to unlock and develop their appreciation for what it is you're doing, you will get far more out of them than you ever will just by paying someone. If I pay you to promote my product, it's £1,000 and it's a grid post, and that's the job done, and you get your grid post.
We'll take it, Alex.
If I unlock, what's that?
We'll take it. Done deal.
Yeah, absolutely. But I never got offered that money, otherwise I possibly wouldn't be sitting here. But also, in contrast to that, if you plug into someone who says, I love your brand, and you work with them on a consistent basis, and you offer them, new product before other people, or access to parts of the business that others might not be able to get to, you will get far more back in terms of brand love and conversational sort of authenticity and coverage and word of mouth and positivity, etc., than you ever will just by saying, transact and we'll see you another time.
So you said you pre-vet your influencers. What chances a mid 30-year-old person living out in the desert in the United States have? What kind of chance do I got? Well, wait. Let me preface. I have about 450 followers on Instagram. So
I'm not going to promise anything to you, Frank. You might be in the waiting room for some time, but we do actually have plans to reward everybody who comes to us, and that might be for another time. Currently, I think you'd be possibly on the waiting list for a little bit longer, but we are actually, and it's sort of great to be talking to you guys, because we're actually in the process of getting ready to launch in the US. So we've done quite a lot of market research, and the time is now for us. I mean, we were actually planning to do it probably about 18 months ago, but lo and behold, our good friend COVID got in the way of pretty much everything. So now is the time. So
I'll start bumping the followers up. I can get at least 15 more.
You've come to the right place, Alex.
But actually, what I would say, and this is a genuine point here, is that we don't call our members influencers. We talk about content creators and people of influence, and we are very big on making sure that the people who fit into the room are the right people for the brands that we're working with. And so we talk a lot about people who have maybe not got the largest of audiences, but they tell amazing stories and they talk to interesting people and they care about causes that really need their support. We'd much rather have somebody on who's got 20,000 followers and they've rowed the Atlantic and they've climbed Kilimanjaro and they genuinely sort of believe and position themselves as an interesting storyteller. That's much more interesting to us than someone with 100,000 followers who poses in the swimsuit every Tuesday and hashtag.
Well, now I'm offended.
Well, I'm sorry. In your swimsuit, that might help your application come through. But we're trying to create essentially. It's a very simple mantra: a home where good brands and good people form these really good collaborations. So if you create amazing content, Frank, we're keen to hear from you.
Well, there we go. When our listeners start to hear all these new endorsements roll in, they'll know where they came from.
Perfect. We'll look forward to it. Swimsuit applications are obviously
when we start promoting all of those bikinis, they'll know exactly what's happened. So you mentioned obviously your background in sports media, and I guess how did that come about? I mean, I think we have listeners, we've had guests on previously who've built, very successful media careers. And I think for a lot of people listening who are passionate about sport and who have, or anything, it doesn't obviously necessarily have to be that, but often it feels as if they have maybe all the skills and knowledge necessary to be able to do what they see on TV or on the radio, but they just don't know how to get there. What was the process like in terms of entering into your media career, and how did it come about?
So that is a very good question. There are a million ways to get in, and I genuinely advocate the best way to do it is to start in the basement. And I went to a pretty good school in the UK. I went to a very good university. I did bizarrely, I did history of art at the university, which doesn't lead directly into sports broadcasting, but I worked quite. Actually, originally I wanted to be a sculptor, funnily enough, many years ago. But was never ever talented enough to do that. So my great love growing up, like most people, or a lot of people, certainly a lot of your listeners, was sport. And I was the kid who, if I wasn't kicking a ball, I was watching something. And I had many, many happy hours doing that. And I, at about 21, and actually the reason I mentioned the history of art thing, I was pretty disengaged with my degree, pretty much from the off, to be honest with you. And instead of working hard in the term time and taking the holidays off, I would have a lot of fun at university and then work really hard during the holidays. And I recognised there were lots of things that I sort of looked into. I wanted to potentially go into advertising. Very nearly went into the army, actually. But sport was always my real passion. And so and it was a very depressing, it was probably 21 years ago that I started out on the work experience trail. And I wrote letters to all sorts of clubs and agencies. And I wrote a letter to Sky saying that I'd love to come in. I've got 2 weeks in the summer holidays. I'd love to come and do some work. Any chance? And I think they said, no, you've done nothing else. Go and do something and then apply to us again. So I went and worked at my hometown club, which was Bath Rugby at the time. I was a huge Bath fan. And I did a few days with them. And that was all good fun. And then I went back to Sky and said, look, I'd love to come. I've done a bit of work. Can you give me a couple of weeks? And lo and behold, they sort of very kindly let me in, and I just trailed, and I made a lot of tea and coffee. I sort of emptied the bins, did the photocopying. I mean, it really was starting at the very basement level, but it was absolute, some of the greatest days of my life. I was sort of eyes on stalks. It was everything that I wanted. I was working with people who I'd grown up watching and idolizing on television. I was learning an enormous amount about an industry I found fascinating. I ended up in the rugby department. I ended up working in the sport that I was hugely passionate about. And I ended up going from making the tea and coffee at Sky in London to saying at the end of the 2 weeks, if I get myself out to Australia, which is where the British and Irish Lions tour, which is sort of one of the most romantic notions in sport, full stop. It's England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland coming together, the best players of, and they set off to the other side of the world and they play test matches against Australia, South Africa and New Zealand. And they go with about 30,000 followers from this part of the world. It's an amazing concept, and it's something that means a huge amount to me. So I said to the guy in charge of the rugby department, if I'm out there, can I work for you on test match day? And he said, yeah, sure. So I spent my student loan flying to Australia. I had a couple of mates who'd gone out there as well. We drove Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney in a proper old banger. I mean, we're bloody lucky to survive it, to be honest with you. But on game day, I ended up working in these cauldron arenas. And the most extraordinary thing happened actually on the first test match between Australia and the British and Irish Lions. And I was meant to be sitting in a television truck, and everyone will know what they look like. They're sort of kilometre and a half from the stadium, and you're plugged into wires. And I was going to be pressing buttons every time somebody made a tackle, and that was my input on the day. I was going to be a sort of stats inputter. And the kit, it got caught in customs. And I was a 21-year-old kid at this point. And so there was nothing for me to do other than make tea and coffee on game day. And that's fine. I'm very happy doing that. But about 15 minutes before kickoff, I made my last cup of tea and coffee, and everyone was about to get down into the game itself. And a guy just came up and he gave me a pitch side pass. And he said, look, there's nothing for you to do. Go and watch the game. And I walked out. I said, it's still funny. It still gives me sort of hairs on the back of my neck. I walked out of this sort of underground tunnel at the Gabba in Brisbane. And it's still, if you're a Lions fan, it's one of the most iconic games that they've ever played. It was an absolute sea of red. The British and Irish fans went to Australia and they turned an Australian stadium red, which is the Lions colour. And I walked around the pitch 15 minutes before watching a team that means a huge amount to me. And I ended up sitting on a plastic chair at the end of the Lions replacement bench. And I was a 21-year-old kid on the other side of the world making tea and coffee in an industry and with people who I had just an extraordinary amount of respect for, sitting at the end of the substitutes bench, 6 yards from the pitch of a game that turned out to be one of the most defining performances of their era. And that was it, really. At that point, I was just like, there is nothing else on earth that I want to do. And so I finished my degree in a pretty haphazard fashion. I joined a week after I left university, still photocopying and making tea and coffee. And I got very, very lucky. And you need an enormous amount of fortune to be able to fulfill a dream like I have. But you've also got to be in the right place to be lucky. And so that's where the hard work comes in. I went from making tea and coffee to reporting. I'd never done any public speaking. I'd had no training at all. I'd never really held a microphone, funnily enough, before the first time that I was reporting on a pitch side live interviews of game. And then it went very quickly. I did reporting. I did presenting. I sort of bobbed around in the backwaters. I did a bit of poker, which was great fun. Lots of tennis. We have a 24-hour news channel in the UK called Sky Sports News, which was an institution when I sort of started on it. I think I was the youngest presenter on it. I was 24, but I looked about 15, I think. So it was quite hard to get any credibility. And then you do enough of it and you relax into it and you begin to make it your own a little bit. But it takes a long time. And, again, I'm sort of conscious I'm waffling a little bit. But the advice I would give to people who want to do it is go after your passion. I'd never have made it in music or, politics, because I don't wake up in the morning and turn to those pages in the papers. You have to go for your passion because it gives you an enormous love for what you're doing, and that's really important. And then you just don't stop trying. And the landscape is totally different now. Anybody can be a presenter on their own channels, and if you're good, you'll get cut through. I started in a depressingly sort of analog era when it really was 15 channels on Sky, and I was very, very lucky. But I worked bloody hard to be lucky, I think. I hope that answers your question.
No, it totally does, and I think it gives a lot of the right messages to people who are aspiring to break into that industry. One of the things I'd be interested to hear about is, you talk about having no public speaking background and never really having held a microphone. A lot of people like to talk about whatever industry they break into, the kind of concept of imposter syndrome. Yeah. How heavy was that for you then, as you sort of start to suddenly be a face on television, but feeling maybe slightly out of place in the process?
Enormous problems with it. And I genuinely would not be, if my career had started 10 years, when did Twitter start? 2007, something like that. So if my career had started 10 years later, I would never, ever, ever have got to where I am now, because I had so many shocking moments that the producers, the outcry, I'd have gone viral. I mean, there's one particular incident where I had an absolute meltdown on air, and I couldn't hear anything, and people thought I was having a stroke, and it's still trotted out every Christmas in something called Sports Funniest Moments or something like that. I think I got to number 3.
Nice, not bad.
Out of 20. Really good, really good. There was a golfer called John van der Velde. I don't know how much you guys love him.
We literally just spoke about this the other
last
day.
Episode.
Last episode.
About him, yeah.
You're kidding?
Yeah, well, because we were talking like the Masters breakdown and kind of
and moments you'll never forget about someone who didn't actually win.
So I am broadcasting equivalent of John van der Velde, which is, I reckon, by a conservative estimate, I've done 20,000 hours of live broadcasting. I've probably done 50 international matches, 4 Lions tours, 50 England games. I've probably presented 300-400 test matches, and all anyone ever asked me about is my meltdown at Adams Park between Wasps and Bath in a sort of nonsensical, non-interesting game on a wet Wednesday night. But that's life. And do you know, it's interesting because that, and I sort of inadvertently got to it, but that was almost the best possible thing that ever happened to me, because it made me realise that none of it really matters. And I've actually helped a few people with coaching and presentation over here in London over the years. And I always sort of go back to that, regardless of what happens. The sun still comes up tomorrow, and if you're lucky, your partner still loves you, and your kids probably will. So don't really worry about it as much. I had a spectacular cock up on air and was back on air 6 days later, and it was all fine. So the imposter syndrome was enormous, and that was because I started on a channel that was obsessed with football, and I didn't really know anything about football. I looked 15, even though I was 24, 25. But it's funny enough, it's like a graph, really. The point at which I really began to love broadcasting was almost the point that the tech business took off, because that became my real focus. That was the thing that had to work. And therefore, since then, and that was probably 5 years ago, since then, broadcasting is nothing but a hobby now. And it's really good fun. And I don't really mind if it goes well or badly. And I have relaxed so much on air as a result, because it's not my be all and my end all. I think if you are totally immersed in something, it becomes a little suffocating after a while. And actually, we have to remember that sport is entertainment. It's fun. It's drama. It's romance. It's all the things that you tune in for when you watch the teams you love. And you have to kind of reflect that as a broadcaster. You have to make it energetic and fun. And if it's crap, you have to say it's crap. And so the less I focus on it, I think the better presenter I've become. But yeah, I struggled enormously with imposter syndrome, and probably it took me 10 years before when that count. And I don't do nearly as much as I used to. I'm doing a bit more than I have, but I do really miss that buzz of you're on air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, cue. I miss that buzz, but it took me 10 years to get to a point where when they said cue, I was like, showtime, as opposed to, oh my God, I hope I don't balls this up. But everybody has it. Everyone has imposter syndrome, don't they?
And I guess along those same lines, you said, you moved up so quickly that I feel like you probably weren't used to and accustomed being around these, probably to use, celebrities and athletes that you watched your whole life. So what was that like, kind of jumping in and, all of a sudden 2 months ago, you're watching and maybe idolizing this person play on the pitch, and then now you're right next to them, asking them questions and interviewing them. I mean, was that had to be super nerve-wracking at first?
The first time I ever did so rugby is my passion. That's the sport I love. And when I began on this channel called Sky Sports News, I looked 15, as I said. I was 24. They said, look, you're not capable yet. You haven't got enough miles under the belt to be able to. So when you cover a sort of a game specifically, there's no auto cue. You just host the show in the way that you would. But on a news channel, it's all written for you, so you are reading off an auto cue. So they said that you've got to get hours and hours and hours under your belt, feeling comfortable on air, knowing what the terminology is, knowing where to look, practicing your interviewing techniques. And I was very, very comfortable with that. Off we go. And then it must have been about 4 months in, and I was absolutely dreadful. I mean, I was all over the place. But the rugby department knew that I knew my stuff, and I'd done a lot of work experience with them. I'd been to Australia, as mentioned. So they knew that I was very keen on the sport. And I was on this is a long-winded story, but I was on a shift between 10 and midnight on Sky Sports News. And then they repeat the 11 till 12 hour, 3 till 6 in the morning, and the whole thing starts again, 24-hour sort of rolling news. And we were in the 11 till 12 hour, and someone came running into the gallery and said, you've got to go home, you've got to go home. There's been a drama with the main rugby presenter. He cannot present tomorrow's games. We need you back in at 4:30 in the morning. You've got 4 games of international rugby to present. And it's sort of, it's a little bit like the kid who gets plucked off the bench and goes on to, play up front for Real Madrid. I mean, it was that sort of moment. And I came back in at 4:30 the following morning, having not slept a wink. I hadn't got a script. I didn't really know what the games were. And I was sort of being like frog marched through by this sort of team of people saying, right, you're going to be fine, but there's a hell of a lot that you need to know. And this is how, so it's like, you're going to be fine. But it just was chaotic. And I will never, ever, ever forget the moment. I was totally out of my depth, fairly petrified. And I had a panel that consisted of Sean Fitzpatrick, who is a World Cup winner and one of the greatest rugby players. I mean, he is a straight into any Hall of Fame 15 without a shadow of a doubt. Just one of the hardest people to ever play the game. Michael Lynott, who won the World Cup with Australia, arguably their greatest captain, world record point scorer. Will Greenwood, who won the World Cup with England and is arguably one of England, got the best try-scoring ratio of any Englishman in the history of the game. And a guy called Bob Skinstad, who was essentially in his prime, the David Beckham of South Africa. And I was sitting there and the call comes through and they go, right, you're on in 15 seconds. And I mean, it's just like staring at a juggernaut. You've got your eyes between the headlights. And Fitzy, who has now become a very good friend, and actually was sort of messaging me about something yesterday, he just leant over as they went 10, 9, and he just went, don't fuck it up, mate. And that was it. And I don't know if I can swear on your pod. Apologies if I can't.
No, you can swear all you want. It's no problem.
Don't fuck it up, mate. And I just went, hello and welcome to a big day of International Rugby Union. And it was just going off the top board. And I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. It just was a whirlwind. And I loved every single second of it. So yeah, I mean, it's funny because I went into a sport where my idols, I was just surrounded by them, and you do go on a bit of a journey when you realise that actually some of them, they all get up in the morning, put their pants on like everybody else, and it rubs off after a while. I was given a very good piece of advice actually when I was sort of starting out, which is never try to be friends with current players, and I totally subscribe and sort of endorse that. If as a broadcaster, you need to tell stories that are sometimes amazing, but also sometimes quite difficult. Coach needs to, move on, or players need to be retired, or whatever it is. You have to have a distance between the two sets. But the other thing I'd very quickly say is it's extraordinary how a lot of the players, certainly in the UK, they're very wary of the media, etc. And that's fine. That's their right. But as soon as they get near retirement, they start getting a little more, oh, great. So, yeah, we'd love to try some television someday. And there's a lot of poaching turned gamekeeper in the UK. And the interesting thing about that is often you will get players coming into studio who you are like, oh, my God, what a player. And they're absolutely terrified being in a live environment. They're worried about what they're going to talk about, whether they look okay. And so often as well, what I found is as I grew into the role as a presenter, my job actually became far more about making people comfortable and ensuring that they are, really happy to be doing what they're doing, rather than sort of idolizing them and that falls away pretty quickly as you grow up, I think. But at the start, hell of a problem.
No, I can imagine. And in our own small way, we can relate. I mean, we've had guests on who, some of them, I mean, like yourself, are extremely comfortable speaking. And then other times they are just immediately nervous, which can be kind of striking because you are imagining these people who, sort of handle massive amounts of pressure on a consistent basis. So in your mind, you imagine that they'll just be like that constantly, but you're obviously taking them outside of their comfort zone, and then everything shifts, which is understandable. I want to touch on something you mentioned over the course of that story, which is, I mean, for our listeners in the US and kind of when you're talking about being on Sky Sports News, it's sort of the equivalent of being on ESPN, obviously, and Sports Center.
100%.
And what I find interesting in what you mentioned there, you talk about how everything is scripted for you and you're just reading off a teleprompter. Now, I think people will think of, certainly our American listeners, thinking of ESPN, where each of the presenters is able to kind of establish their own personality a bit in the way that they present. I mean, Stuart Scott maybe being the most iconic of them in terms of throwing his little sort of tidbits into the way he discusses things. Did you have any input in terms of what the script was, or was it literally, here it is, read the news word for word, don't mess up?
Very good question. So there were absolutely presenters on the channel who'd be able to do whatever they wanted to do, and some unbelievably good broadcasters. It's a hell of a training ground. The stage and age that I was at, I literally stuck to the train tracks that were written for me. And that, I mean, I say that you begin to you begin to try things. So you begin to start interviewing people once I've done a few weeks, and then often you start updating live games as you're watching them. So it's a very curious channel. It's very hard to describe to people who haven't seen it, but essentially it's people in vision talking about live sport that they're watching that you can't see, is the kind of premise of the channel. And I remember watching, I think it must have been the 2006 World Cup, and I was describing, he's called Simao Sambrosa, and the performance that he was putting in for Italy, and I kept calling him Samosa, and everyone was just like, what are you doing? This channel's totally out of control. So I was, I wasn't very good at it at the start, but you learn pretty quickly because you kind of have to. The difference between Sky Sports News and the reason it's written for you is that stories are coming in all of the time and people are cutting features. And so there is a producer who is constantly updating the rundown, and it's a live channel for 18 of the 24 hours of the day. And I think as a presenter, you couldn't really be expected to know what you're talking about. So you have a lot of help with that. The difference between that and the rugby is that I never, I did the rugby for probably 12 years, I think it was. I mean, I didn't write very much, but I didn't say a word that wasn't mine. And that's quite a big jumping off point. I had a great mate who he actually came up from New Zealand, James Gamble, brilliant broadcaster. And he had worked in New Zealand, and they used to use autocues, as we call them, teleprompters, as you do. And he arrived for his first live game for Sky and was like, "Where's the teleprompter?" And they're like, "I know we don't use them in the UK." And he was like, "Right, okay." And there was about 7 minutes to go until he's on air, and he's furiously trying to kind of work out what to talk about. It is an amazing baptism of fire when you start out just going with what's in your head. And I can't really describe to listeners sometimes how difficult it is to broadcast in a stadium with 82,000 people and music and rain. It can be very. I counted it up. There was some counted up for me. On the biggest games I worked on, I would have, I think it's something like 16 or 17 people who I'd have to listen to at any one time in my headset, from the director to the producer to the guests to the commentators to the reporters to the people in the VT trucks, etc. So you've got a huge amount of information in your ears in very trying circumstances, but it's unbelievably good fun. I mean, it's unbelievably good fun when it all comes together. And it's a real privilege. I genuinely mean that. It's a huge privilege to be able to help shape and tell the stories that big audiences stop to watch. And I've never, ever, ever forgotten that. It's a very, very fortunate position. It's a hell of a rush, but it's a hell of a privilege.
And, trying to, I guess, progress a little bit on towards the things that you're doing more recently, but as part of that transition, I've heard you speak about in the past how, to a certain extent, you almost defined yourself as being Alex Payne, Sky Sports.
Yeah.
And that you could kind of relate to rugby, or athletes retiring, where you have attached yourself, sort of your profession or your club or your sort of international status defines you as a person, and that you had to shift away from that as you left Sky Sports. How difficult of a transition was that for you, and kind of what was the period like immediately after leaving in terms of then embracing sort of new challenges and new goals that you then had?
Yeah, very good question. What was that like? So I would say, I mean, where to start the answer? I was about as loyal a company man as you can be. I mean, my Twitter handle, and in fact we were set up as this, but my Twitter handle was at Sky Sports Alex P. So my brand, this is dreadful, but people identified me very much with the company, so much so that my family just forever were taking the piss, and was just known as Sky Sports Alex P, and it's a sort of big for your boots type thing. Let's cut you down. And it was a very sad situation, really, because when I took over as the lead broadcaster of rugby for Sky, we had every right, all of the television rights, and the landscape has changed enormously. And when I was a kid in the UK, we had 3 channels, and now there are not only 900 available via satellite service, but you've also got the infinite pool that is YouTube and the internet. So what's gone from being a viewing option of 3 is now exponential. You can watch anything from anywhere at any point in the history of whatever's been broadcast, which is an extraordinary concept to get your mind around. The reason I mention that is that the landscape in the UK became much more challenging for Sky, and BT came onto the landscape. They snapped up the rugby. They saw a big opportunity there. And so I went through about 6 years where, as a broadcaster, every year we were seeing more and more rights get chipped away. And we ended up with a portfolio that wasn't really that enticing, and we were sort of bobbing around a little bit, hoping that it would come back, and then it didn't. And so it ended up actually with Sky losing everything. And I went from, I sort of was telling this to someone the other day, I was a person who had a sort of, every man has a spreadsheet, which, you put in your income and whatever it is, and your outgoings and your kids and all that kind of thing. And I had a spreadsheet that was built, and it was just a lovely, gentle trajectory. And it was going to take me all the way to retirement as a broadcaster. I was going to work 3 days a week, and I was going to have a busy day and have my hair cut and go for a coffee, and then I'd do a bit of work at the weekends, and life was going to be very peachy. And I had these sort of contract renegotiation conversations, and the first one was very promising. We love what you do, we'll find something else. The second one was, we think we might, move you into X, Y, Z. And the third one was, thanks very much, we're not renewing your contract. And I'm sure there were signals in there that I'd missed, etc. But I genuinely thought that we were just going to carry on. And so when they said thanks but no thanks, I was like, wow, did not see that coming. I was 37 years old with 2 kids and a wife, etc. And I had sort of 3 or 4 months until I was out of a job, which was fairly alarming, really. And I had started the room at that point, but it was very, very embryonic. It was 3 of us around my kitchen table, and we weren't really generating any revenue, and it wasn't really, it wasn't really a lily pad to leap to. It was an opportunity, but not much more than that. And it was really, really difficult. And I was very, very clear with myself. I did not want to be bitter about it. These things happen. Everybody gets dealt their hands, and you have to deal with what you're given. But I wasn't very experienced at a setback of that magnitude, I suppose. I'd been incredibly fortunate, and I'd worked incredibly hard, and I felt very loyal to the business. But I was adamant not to be bitter, and I was very, very lost for quite a while, because you walk into a room, or you walk into a party, or whatever it is, and people want to talk to you about working for Sky, and they want to talk to you about what you do. And with all of that gone, I was like, what on earth am I? I'm a fairly bang average sports presenter who works in a relatively interesting sport in the UK, but certainly not a global sport in the true sense of the word. And I was very, very lost. I had some very good people who kind of helped me. I was given a brilliant piece of advice when I was really genuinely, the wheels were wobbling. He said, look, and I hope people would take it the right way. He said, it's very hard to starve. And I know I don't mean that in a way that others out there have obviously got far. I'm in an incredibly privileged position, but it's sort of, I got to the point where I was thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to earn another penny ever again, and therefore, how do I get through what's to come? And that sort of began to build me back up again. And then just little things drop into place, and suddenly the room began to get going, and we went from 3 to 10, and we're now 40 odd in the business, and that's become very exciting. I ended up getting an invitation to work on a podcast with the 2 reprobates that I work with now, and that's turned into something that is just an absolute beast. We're now in business together. We're bringing out a gin. We've got a live tour around the UK with 16 dates of 38,000 tickets or whatever it is. So the end point is that it's been the most turbulent 5-6 years of my entire life by a factor of 100, and I have loved every single minute of it. I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't go back to Sky. Funny if I still actually do a bit of work for them now and again, but I have embraced the chaos. It's the richest, most sort of characterful development that I've been on, from basically being on this spreadsheet of pretty predictable, progress, through to Jesus Christ, where the hell do you earn tomorrow's sandwich type thing. And I have genuinely loved it. So yeah, I went through some very, very dark times, and I've absolutely no qualm saying that. I really did find myself in a bit of a pit. But I'm a much more resilient, and I would hope much more interesting character off the back of it than I ever was just turning up and doing what I was doing.
And you've mentioned The Good, the Bad, and the rugby podcast there, and your co-host, and Mike Tyndall, former World Cup winner with England, and James Haskell, I guess in some respects is one of the biggest personalities in the world of rugby, and that's not to downplay his career achievements within the sport itself. I find your podcast to be incredibly refreshing from the perspective that the kind of honesty and that comes through the conversations that you have to be refreshing. Yeah. I think in some ways for American listeners, not direct parallels, but in a sense, close to what Pat McAfee has managed to achieve in some ways, in terms of kind of just talking about it in a genuine way about sport. Yeah. Do you think you're helped in having those conversations from just the culture within the sport itself of rugby, and in a sense, maybe it not being as big of a global sort of institution and organization as some others, and people are then more willing to be open? Or, how have you managed to kind of strike that chord in terms of getting very genuine conversations with the people who come on?
So it's a really interesting point. I think part of the magic is in when we pulled the 3 of us together. So I was very involved in building it. Mike Tindall is a phenomenal player, hard as nails. Looks very similar to Jason Statham, for those of your audience who aren't huge rugby fans. Won the World Cup, which is the greatest accolade, and then married the Queen's granddaughter over here. So he sort of transcends not just sport, at which he was excellent, but also sort of culture and relevance in the public eye. He's got the Rolodex to beat all Rolodex as well. His contacts book is extraordinary. James Haskell is a much more ebullient, effusive, controversial, exhausting character, if I'm honest with you. Achieved an enormous amount in the game as well, but sort of has always found himself getting in and out of trouble with fair sort of regularity. I was very, very straight-laced. I was sort of Captain Sensible as a broadcaster, and the fun that they've had is in corrupting and destroying what was once a very respectable media career, and actually it's been quite fun letting them do it. So the three of us we are very different characters, but we are bonded by this thread of rugby, I suppose. But we are a rugby show that isn't obsessed with rugby, so we talk a lot about mental health. We did an extraordinary episode actually with Hask's best friend once, which was the two of them clowning around. This guy Paul Doran-Jones played for England as well. They were having a real sort of mate session, and then suddenly in the space of an answer it changed from the two of them prattling about through to Paul talking about his struggles as a single father and the legal system in the UK and the battles that he's had on that front. It was the most extraordinary hour of conversation. We've had Nigel Owens on our podcast talking about he was the best referee in the world of our game, but talking about his struggles, in terms of coming out and, the journey that he went on. That was extraordinarily emotional. So it's not really about the nuance and the day-to-day of the game. It's about characters who have a foot within our sport. Why do we get people to unlock? I don't know, really. I think it is that blend between James and Mike and the relationship that they have forged with a lot of our guests from being in the sporting environment with them in the change rooms, etc. And also, hopefully, my abilities as a journalist to know what the seams are to pick at. And it's been an extraordinary journey because we genuinely love what we do. It's an absolute shambles, but it's one of the highlights of the week for the three of us. But we actually have quite a few people now asking to come on the pod because they want to tell their story. And I think that's a very interesting thing in this day and age. You asked about rugby's place within the sort of sporting matrix in the UK. It's not football, and it's probably tucked in behind cricket, which gives them a bit of freedom. If a footballer steps out of line in the UK, they're front page news. If a rugby player does it, well, it's probably a sidebar on page 30. And so they've got more freedom to do that. We are living in the digital era where every slip up is suddenly stuck up online and everybody has a view on it. But rugby players in the main, it's a very honest sport. It's very difficult to play the game at the highest level, I think, if you're not going to commit. And I say honest, I don't mean honest in terms of, everyone's breaking the laws at every point of the game, but you have to be a relatively committed guy to be able to succeed in the sport because of the very nature of its physicality, etc. You have to stand up and be counted. And I think that leads to individuals who are rounded and interesting. I think a lot of it probably comes down to the fact that a lot of rugby players won't be set for life once they leave the sport as well. So they're conscious of the bigger picture, I think, at all times, and therefore, that leads to some very interesting conversations with some. I mean, I can't really talk about it because the show hasn't come out yet. But the show we filmed last night with a guy called Ellis Gedge, who is, if you haven't heard of Ellis and you don't love your rugby, he's a kind of cross between Mike Tyson and. He's sort of like a mini Mike Tyson, really. I mean, he is an absolute superstar here in England. And he's come from, by his own admission, the wrong side of the tracks. He was a bad boy growing up. And I think, he's been very open about that. And rugby has kind of taken him. He's obviously put a huge amount into it, but rugby has elevated him into this really inspirational character. He's captained his country. He's seen as a real leader amongst some pretty alpha males. And he's part of our pod. He does 10, 15 shows a year with us. And charting his journey, he actually has been one of the greatest things that we've done as a pod, because we were talking to him 3 or 4 years ago where he was getting banned every week and he was fighting every week and he was angry at everything. And, he drops in twice a month, and we've just been on this journey with him as he matures and he grows up and he recognises that the way. A really interesting line he came out with last night is that he's playing the best rugby of his career right now, and he has been very honest with himself and said that he was turning up to training in a bad mood and tired and wasn't doing as well as he could, and it's because he was gaming until 2:00 in the morning. He's a huge and a very successful gamer, and he just said, "Look, I can't continue to do that." But you wouldn't find. I don't think you'd find many sports people who sort of who open up in that way. And I think Ellis he's just not frightened of any of the consequences, and that's something we're really proud of. Is that we are a space where people come to genuinely tell their story and to know that they will be challenged. It's not just a media interview where you get in and get out as quickly as you can.
It's surprising to me because when I think gamers, I definitely think football, but then for rugby, I think they're having more fun besides gaming. So it's interesting now that it's gotten into every sport.
Well, I think Luke Cowan-Dickey, who's the England hooker at the moment, I think he was. I'm not a gamer, so I don't know whether I'm talking out of my the role. I think he was the best Medal of Honor or Call of Duty certain game. I'm really showing my age. He was prolific, I think, in Call of Duty, and was number 1 in the world at shooting something.
Okay,
which means nothing to me, but apparently is very impressive to those who know.
No, I mean, within that world, it'd be huge. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it goes to show you that it's everywhere. I'm sure constantly trying to get my kids off there. So I know the pain.
So you're talking about you've now, I guess, mentioned half a dozen world famous rugby players that you've been next to in either your podcast or broadcasting. And Eddie and I were actually just talking off air when we were watching the Masters a few days ago about how we're so tired of commentators saying that, oh, this guy is so competitive. Like he's at the highest level. And I've heard he's a fierce competitor. Like, of course, like they're reaching the highest level because they're competitive. But that got me thinking, you're around these people when they're not on the pitch. How competitive are they? Like when they're doing a broadcast, like when you go to commercial break, are they kind of arguing and kind of fighting and kind of trying to do, I can do this better than you can? Like, do you have any good stories about how competitive they can get just in their normal life?
Well, what I would say just before the sort of competitive thing is, I think increasingly, and I have worked with a lot of players. So rugby has only been a professional sport since 1995. So over the years, I've worked with a lot of guys who are amateurs, and they played it because they loved it. And they played it at the highest level and were exceptional, but they did it because they love it. And now, obviously, the game is fully professional, and it is it's an extraordinary commitment. The more I work with Hask and Tims, the more I realise, and I say it to them on a weekly basis, to reach the pinnacle of any sport now, you've actually got to be pretty weird. You have got to be slightly on the edge of normality. And that is because you have to drive yourself to extremities and commitments and dedications that people like, I presume you guys and I just got no interest in putting myself to that place. So, yes, they're uber competitive, but they're also quite weird, is the honest truth of it. I mentioned Sean Fitzpatrick and Michael Liner earlier, who are, they're two of the sort of granddads of rugby now, and I hope they won't mind me saying that. But one's an Australian and one is a Kiwi, and they have had over the years just the most wonderful rivalry. And I will never forget working with them one morning. And so we used to do in the UK, we would be showing rugby from New Zealand and Australia. And so you're in the studio at 4:30 in the morning. You're on air at 6:30. You get breakfast served while you're watching the game, etc. And as we came on air one morning, Michael, who's very tidy, his tie is always in a beautiful knot, and his hair is perfect, and he's very particular about the way he speaks. Australian, man of the city. Great rivalry with Fitzy, who's a bit of a rough and ready Kiwi, and his hair's always all over the place, and his fingers are mangled, and he looks like he's fought 1,000 wars. They're always sort of going at each other. And as we came on air, the count goes 5, 4, 3, and I'm about to do my good morning, everybody, and welcome to the show. And Fitzy just leans over, and he just, I don't even know if I could do it, he just depresses Michael's chair. So Michael went from looking erudite and small to sort of like that on screen. And we came on air on this sort of this two-shot, and Michael Liner, this great icon of Australian rugby, is basically sitting on the floor with Fitzy kind of looking down at him and watching Michael try and pump his chair back up. And I mean, it just was an absolute shambles. but one of the funniest things that I've ever seen in studio. It's just moments like that. So I mean, uber competitive. You get on the golf course and it turns to fisticuffs, but it's the little one-upmanships that's where you really see the competition come to the fore. What you get once or twice is newbies on the block who will arrive in a studio and they will have come with notes that are prepared and pristine and they'll have done their research, and we'll be having breakfast beforehand in sort of the truck at a game. And the wise old owls come in and they go, "Oh, what you got today?" And they'll be, the young guy will say, "Well, I've got this stat on that, and I think this is a very interesting angle of play, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this player." And you'll go on air, and in the first answer, the wise old owl will talk about the stat that the kid's just given him and that facet of play and how much he's looking forward to watching this kid have a run out today. And the young pup is just staring into the headlights with absolutely all of his gold material taken and used by others. So yeah, I mean, I think those fires, they never die, but they just move to different battlegrounds.
I'm conscious, obviously, we don't want to keep you forever, and we're kind of approaching the hour mark. So I, do want to let you get on with your evening. I have one more question, which is actually going to switch us a little bit away from rugby. So Frank, I don't know if you have a final question that might be rugby related. If not, I'm going to kind of switch topics slightly for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of have to ask, what's the best match you've been a part of broadcasting? I mean, I'm sure there's many, but is there one in particular that just stands out? And what did it feel like?
Yeah, that is a very, very good question. I think I would probably, and I'll try and keep this quite short because it was an extraordinary, extraordinary day. I'd probably turn to the second test in Wellington in 2017 between the British and Irish Lions, and we're sort of going back to where we started, which is a team that means a huge amount to me, and New Zealand. And for those of your listeners who've got not a lot of love or interest in rugby, the All Blacks are, I think I'm right in saying, the most successful sports team in history. I think they've got like a 90-odd% win ratio. They are the kings of rugby, and for a little island, on the wrong side of the world, they are remarkably good at it. The reason I think that they meant so much to me is that it was probably a point in my career where I was beginning to really enjoy broadcasting and really enjoy being on air. I wasn't quite as frightened of it as I had been. It was the second test. It's a 3-test series, and the Lions had been beaten very badly in the first. So, obviously everyone was expecting them to lose again. They hadn't lost. New Zealand hadn't lost at home in any test match in years. It was a huge ask for an invitational team to go down there and beat them. And we were working with that day a guy called Saria McGeechan, who is just one of the sort of greats of the game. He was a Lions coach, hugely successful in that regard. He was also a phenomenal player back in the day. And he is sort of enormously respected and a guy who I admire greatly. And in the 2 or 3 hours before, I mean, it must have been 2.5 hours before we were due to go on air, he became very, very unwell. And we were genuinely extremely concerned. Straight to hospital, not in a very good way at all, if I'm honest with you. And it was a very, very sort of anxious situation to be in. And normally, if you're on a good day, you will end up, you're having an hour's rehearsal time and you'll get very comfortable and off you go. And because of this situation with Syrian, we ended up basically not having any rehearsal at all. In fact, we weren't actually going to go on air. It was that worrying. And they were just going to come on air with the game. We weren't going to do our build-up from our studio, which is normally sort of a full hour. So the whole thing is beginning to become not really about the rugby and very much about his health and his welfare. And with about 5 minutes to go until we were scheduled to go on air, call comes through, he's fine, he's sitting up in bed, he wants the show to go on. So suddenly we've got 4 minutes to get ourselves ready for what for me was the biggest broadcast I'd ever done. We hadn't rehearsed and we weren't really entirely sure what was happening, and everything had been very much about not the show. And it's in those moments that you sort of, the hours and hours and hours you've done on Sky Sports News and the amazing team that you have around you come to the fore. And we ended up doing one of the best build-ups we'd ever done because people are just buzzing. He's going to be fine. The show is on. Off we go. And it was fun and it was lively. And there are days in sport when you turn up at a ground expecting one thing and there just is something really weird. There's a crackle, there's an energy. And suddenly this sort of energy built around the stadium. The Lions fans were all in. It was pouring with rain. And it just turned into one of those days where New Zealand were phenomenal. They built themselves an early lead. The Lions were hanging on in there, bit of rope-a-dope going on. New Zealand then have a man sent off, and everyone thinks the Lions are going to come back. This is going to be amazing. The Lions then start playing even worse, and so you're like, my God, they're going up with an absolute sort of damp squib of a final performance. 2-0, the series is over. We've got a week in New Zealand to kill with nothing on the third test. And suddenly in the last, I think it was the last 11 minutes, the Lions from nowhere scored these 2 extraordinary tries with the very last kick of the game. They win the test match. And it just was a seismic sort of result for a team that is stretched in all resources. And I will never ever forget that then. It was just a wonderful story to be a part of, which was finished off by my brother, who'd flown out to watch the test series with a couple of mates. And we had this sort of a phenomenal studio looking down on all the Lions fans. And in the post-match build-down, my brother, who had consumed far more than he should have done, basically tried to climb in through the window to say hello as we were live with Sean Fitzpatrick and Stephen Ferris, some of the greatest players who played the game. And there's this still on the family pinboard at home of me in my suit and my tie with my clipboard talking to the greats, and my brother pissed as a fart with his Lions hat on, clambering in through the window and security hauling him off. And it was just a great day. And it's sort of, it could have gone in such an awful direction. It ended up ending in the most extraordinary circumstances. And yeah, I'd do that one again if I could. That was a good old day.
I mean, that's amazing. And then just quickly, I mean, kind of taking your brother as the example, he's there solely as a fan and is just, overtaken by the moment. How hard is it sometimes as a broadcaster to be in that experience and have to use the emotions, I guess, to your advantage, but not overuse them where you now just look like a crazy fan and not who you're supposed to be, like a professional broadcaster?
Yeah, it's really interesting that. So as a professional broadcaster, you have to tread the line, and that can be very, very difficult at times. I did. Funny enough, I keep talking about the Lions, but I did the Lions last summer for Sky, and they went to South Africa, and they lost with the last kick of the third test, which is exactly what had happened 12 years earlier. In fact, it was the same player who kicked them to defeat in 2009, who kicked South Africa to victory again in 2021. And that is really, really hard, particularly if you care about it and you've put a lot into your broadcast, because at that point it's people who just want to kick the telly. Funnily enough, I found it actually easier to control my emotions as a broadcaster because you've got a job to do than I do if I watch it now. I sort of pace around and scream and shout a bit. But I think you're right. You said a really interesting thing about commentary, and I think there is room now for a more sort of colourful way of talking about it. And that, I think, is what the podcast does. I mean, we don't talk about it in the moment, but we talk about it with great energy off the back of it. I would love, and I've always said this, I would love a sports channel that is 18 plus, and you get commentators who say what they really think. That guy's an abs. What is he fucking doing? I think that would be a really enjoyable way to listen to commentary who are saying what you're thinking. But I can understand why Sky haven't necessarily gone in for that as a channel at this point. So yeah, it's you learn very quickly to control your emotions when there's a job to do. But it's funny how those emotions come out much more now that I do less of that. And ultimately we all go into it because we love the sport. We're fans at heart. That's why we pursue the careers that we're lucky enough to be able to go for. And that fan has come back out again as I do a little bit less of it.
I think there's a number of topics we could go into in more detail in terms of what you've done in your media career and what you're currently doing with the podcast and stuff like that, and stories, I'm sure, and just an infinite number of interesting anecdotes. So it would be great
to. I've waffled a lot. It's very nice to be asked questions. My job is always to ask them, so I'm taking the opportunity to waffle. Apologies.
No, I mean it's great, and as I'm sure you can appreciate, it's actually wonderful interviewing people where you ask a question and they just run with it. It's a very pleasant experience versus feeling like you're kind of pulling teeth with someone and trying to drag the interest out of them. And it would be probably great to have you back on in the future because I think there's so many areas we could still go into. I have one final question for you, which is a completely different direction to what we've been discussing in. Sure. But you went to Eton College. which
I did, yeah.
for those unfamiliar with it, one of the sort of most, sort of a historical institution from a, a schooling perspective in the United Kingdom. And in many ways, probably what a lot of foreigners imagine when they think of what it's like going to a kind of British school, in that you're very dressed up in your uniforms with tails and waistcoats on, and the most formal experience possible in some respects. I'm sure, again, there's a lot of stories you could go into in terms of what that experience was like, but I have two questions, which is, one, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that people have when they do imagine either the students attending or what the experience is like at Eton? And additionally, as you've then got older, what have you grown to appreciate that you felt like was normal when you were there, that now, as you've kind of undoubtedly found out more about what other people's experiences were like, you realize was quite peculiar?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, bizarrely, funny enough, I think Eton was founded in 1440 or something like that, which I think makes it older than modern America. So there's a lot of history there, and you do definitely feel that. Well, I suppose you do you feel that or not? You don't really feel it so I went at 13, from 13 to 18. What is the biggest misconception? I mean, interestingly, actually, I wouldn't probably have gone here otherwise, but I'm actually I went to see it again the other day because I've got a boy, and he's sort of getting to that age where we're looking at secondary schools, etc. And it was very, very interesting going back. It is a school that is laden in history, and it's had 20 odd British prime ministers, and it's produced some of the most extraordinary characters out of the school itself. And yet the thing that really stuck out to me going to have a look at it, this was a few weeks ago actually, is that it is modernising rapidly. And I think it's a very difficult balance that the school has to strike, because you have to remember where you've come from, and you have to maintain tradition, because that's an important necessity. But also you have to be prepared to move forward, and the world is changing in the most extraordinary speed and in the most all-encompassing directions, if that's the thing. But I think the biggest misconception of the school is that it is all it's all just rich kids, basically, and that is not the reality of it. There is a very small number of kids who pass through the school, or boys who pass through the school, who are responsible for 95% of the way that Etonians are perceived, would be my answer to your question. There are a lot of very, very normal people who go through, and of course they're enormously privileged to have the opportunity to go to what I would probably say is one of the best schools in the world. But there are a lot of children who aren't privileged who are now going through that school in the same way. There's an enormous bursary. I can't remember the statistic, but there's an enormous bursary program in place. And it is not just about kids who can afford it. It's about kids who deserve it now. And that's absolutely right. The second part to your question is, what do I sort of appreciate about it? I went in, and I grew up in a very rural sort of county in the UK called Dorset, Greenfields. I went to a little school. It was, I'm not the person that you would perceive to be an Etonian. Certainly, in going in, I was wide-eyed and 13 years old. And going in wide-eyed and 13 years old, you don't really know what it is that you're doing, and you don't really necessarily feel that overawed by it as a result. I mean, it is a remarkable place, actually, when you go back now and look at it. But the thing that Eton did for me, that I will always be eternally grateful for, is that we did two things. One is, I think it took a very, very ordinary kid, and I was bang average at everything, and it gave me a chance to be really good at something when I found what that thing was. And I think that is a very special trait to have. And I don't actually think I ever found it at school. I think I found it when the passion that I had for sport was unlocked by combining that love by an opportunity at Sky. And I mentioned earlier that I'd never done any broadcasting, and I'd never done any training, and I'd never done any acting, and I'd never done any performing of any real capacity. But when I found the thing that I knew I wanted to do, it had given me a confidence, I suppose, a belief, a resilience to go and get it. And I took a step off the top diving board, and I'd never done any training of any sort. And with 12 hours notice, my executive producer said the first time I ever used a live microphone was 6 o'clock on a Friday evening, and he said, I haven't got a reporter for the game at Twickenham tomorrow. I'd like you to do it. And at 2 o'clock the following day, I went live on air at a rugby match with 80,000 people in the crowd. Now, you've got to be in the right place at the right time, and you've got to work bloody hard to do it. But I think the school gave me just a belief that when I found the thing I wanted to find or was looking for, that I'd be all right and I could give it a proper crack. And I feel eternally grateful. I'm unbelievably lucky to have gone to a school like that. And I hope that I've sort of repaid the investment and the opportunity that my parents gave me by finding the thing that I really loved and going for it and sort of reaching it, really. So I think that the perceptions of the people who go there are driven by a very small minority of the kids who come out. And I've got some unbelievably good friends from the days that I had there, and they're all very normal people. They really are. Very cognizant and very aware of the amazing opportunity they've had. But it's a bit of a bubble in your life. You go into this extraordinary establishment. You are given every opportunity under the sun to find the thing that you want to do. They will really help you go for it if you commit to it. And then you're often back out into the world again. So it's a pretty small microcosm in your entire life. It's an amazing school. And it did amazing things for me, but it's not the be all and the end all. I think you've got to put a lot in and around it in order to actually make it work. It doesn't give anything to you on a plate.
I think that's a good explanation, and I do think it's just a fascinating world for people, who are unfamiliar with it. And I do think there's a kind of aura in some respects that surrounds it, some positive, some negative, and
my room at school looked out onto Windsor Castle, and you end up wearing these tailcoats every day, and you think you look normal, and you go to school, you go to chapel in a building that was built in 1480 or whatever it is, and it's just all part of it. The more you do something, the more normal it becomes, I suppose. But if you walk through the town, I go back now, and I'm like, it's just another world. And I left 24 years ago, and it's just I feel so removed from it. 24 years old.
I picture the most sophisticated school lunches I've ever seen.
Oh, it was pheasant every day, and it was caviar and fine champagne. Yeah. We had chicken. I remember we had chicken 14 days in a row once because the catering staff got their budgets wrong. So, those are the things you remember from the days. Chicken every day for 2 weeks.
Must have been a revolution.
Yeah.
But
really.
I remember having something that tasted like chicken. At my high school.
I mean, it's interesting too, and just the way you describe it, overlooking Windsor Castle and the kind of how old the chapel itself is. I mean, we recently on an episode spoke about the fact, of one of the things that strikes Americans when they come to Europe, and that consistent theme amongst tourists of this is older than my country, or this is older with the whole city I'm from. And it was a BuzzFeed article that we were discussing. So, the most reputable source possible. But it is something that has consistently, for me, in terms of hosting people now who are coming from the US or even coming from Australia or wherever it is, where you have this moments where they'll kind of look at not Windsor Castle, but a kind of insignificant, we'll be walking around the streets of Paris and they'll say to me, oh my God, that church is so old and magnificent. What is it? And you just tell, I don't know, it's just another church. I've never paid any notice to it before, and it is always interesting in a sense, yours on a different scale, but how things can become very normal and just sort of bog standard very easily.
We all live in quaint little hamlets over here in the UK. Let's not change any stereotypes.
But Alex, thank you so much for the time that you've taken to speak with us. We're very appreciative,
thank
obviously,
you so much.
And it's been fascinating. It would be great to have you on again in the future because I think we only have tapped into a fraction of the topics that we could have gone into in more detail and some of the anecdotes that you would have been able to provide. But thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, and thank you both very much indeed. Thank you for listening, and I hope you can get something useful.
Yeah,
no, absolutely. And
Rugby World Cup next year, right? So maybe we'll have to have you back. Maybe give us a little preview.
Yeah. Well, actually, funny enough, Rugby World Cup 2031, I think, is the one to watch because that, fingers crossed, will be in the US.
Well, look,
and it's a sport that is growing rapidly on your side of the pond, and it's. Yeah. I'll be really interested to see whether people get into it.
I mean, look, you've got the national, again, talking about in terms of moving the room, kind of expanding to the US. Here you've got, one co-host in Paris for the next Rugby World Cup. You got another co-host in the US for a World Cup 8 years down the line. It's the stars are aligning for you in terms of just building off the back of this.
Here's our luck. This is the luck we needed.
Yeah, exactly.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
we'll make this a thing.
But
thank you, gents.
So much.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
And just one final note, I guess, for people who have enjoyed the conversation, they can obviously find you regularly on the Good, the Bad, and the Rugby podcast. I don't know if you want to plug. You've said you're not the most active person on social media, and that's not how you see yourself. But if there's anywhere else they can find you or interact with you, do you want to do any additional plugs?
Good, the Bad, and the Rugby is, yes. I will apologise in advance to any people who come and find us and then they don't necessarily enjoy what they listen to. And then I do socials. I think I'm at Alex Payne TV, which was a nod to yesteryear, but maybe one day again in the future. Who knows?
At not Sky Sports, Alex Payne.
Yeah.
At not Sky Sports, Alex Payne. May he forever lie and rest in peace.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, and have a great evening.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.